Hi there, and welcome to this tutorial on GCSE Biology for the AQA Specification, focusing on the topic of animal tissues, organs and organ systems, and in particular honing in on the effect of lifestyle on some non-communicable diseases. I'm Shumina from StudyMind, where we help you revise GCSE Biology with our helpful video tutorials, tailored to your subject, your specification, and to you. If you're new here, make sure you click the subscribe button. Whilst you are watching, please leave any comments below if you're unsure about anything, and let us know if it's your first time watching our videos so we can send you our free revision materials. We also have helpful timestamps below for each part of the video to help guide you through the specification. So let's get started.
Hi all, and welcome to tutorial 6 of 7, in which we'll be looking at the effect of lifestyle on disease. And in particular, we're going to be focusing on non-communicable diseases, and we talked about an example of this over in tutorial 2.4, in which we were exploring coronary heart disease. But in that tutorial, we were focusing more on the aspects of the pathology of the disease, so the whole kind of disease process leading up to coronary heart disease. But here we're going to be looking at the lifestyle factors that may contribute to the onset of coronary heart disease, and we're also going to be looking at a few other non-communicable diseases too. So just as a quick recap, in our last lesson we looked at 4 examples of factors affecting health, and we also looked at the definitions of health and disease. So do go back and watch that, because I think that's a good kind of introduction to what we're now moving on to. So these are our key learning objectives today. We're going to explore the relative personal but also economical costs of non-communicable diseases. We're then going to move on to look at some risk factors, and finally we're going to look at sampling. So lots of specification points today, but ultimately we're just focusing on a few general themes, so don't worry too much, but do go through these at the end and make sure that you understand what each sentence is aiming at. So first let's have a look at some of the costs of non-communicable diseases, and we're talking about human but also financial costs here. So non-communicable disease can cause great suffering to those with the disease itself, but also to those around them. So it can have big impacts on the relatives of people with these diseases, but also on carers treating the diseases. So in terms of the person themselves, their life expectancy is lowered, but also their quality of life too. And disease can also affect their mental health. But financial cost-wise, much of the NHS's budget is spent on chronic illness, and in addition, families may give up jobs or move in order to provide the necessary health care for these patients. So you can see here how there are various factors that occur as a result of non-communicable disease. And we can look at these on various levels. So if we focus on the individual level, we can say that in terms of the individual human themselves, it reduces their quality of life and mental health. But also financially, it's going to reduce their ability to work and earn money, which means they may become reliant on, for example, community sources of money. On the level of the local community, it's going to affect people around the individual who care for them. And financially, it's going to lead to an increased cost of healthcare to treat this particular individual, because we've now got to treat the non-communicable disease that they have. On a national level, these non-communicable diseases add up amongst individuals and cause increased social issues such as obesity, but also reduced morale. And financially, we're going to have to do more medical research in order to understand how to treat or prevent these non-communicable diseases, so it's going to lead to an increased cost in terms of research. Globally, non-communicable disease results in increased deaths, but financially, as a result of the individual being less able to work and earn money, it's going to lead to a reduced overall supply of global labour, and therefore economies are going to suffer. So generally less developed countries, which may experience more disease rates, will have worse economies than more developed countries, because they're going to have a workforce that it's going to be less healthy, so they're going to be less productive. So you can use common sense when discussing topics like these. So don't worry too much about memorising these points here in this slide. It's more about listening to the concepts and being able to reproduce them in the exam. So, you can use your common sense with that. But also, some questions may ask you to consider one of the factors at each of the 4 levels on an individual level. So it might say on a global level, how may non-communicable disease affect people? And so you want to talk about that on the global level. So do read the question carefully. So now let's take a look at some examples. So going back to factors affecting incidence, so we have lifestyle factors which can increase your risk of non-communicable disease on a local level. But on a national level, an impoverished area may have more lifestyle factors contributing to non-communicable disease than a different area. So for example, a poorer area may have increased alcohol intake and smoking, leading to a greater incidence of these diseases on a national level. And globally, if a country is less economically developed, it may have a worse lifestyle, therefore leading to higher rates of these diseases on a global level. And this can occur on both the lifestyle factor stage, but also in a similar way in terms of environmental factors. So let's look at this in more detail. So diet-wise, certain towns may have many fast food chains, and on a national level this may contribute to worse diets. This will sum up in terms of a global level, and therefore we can actually look at global rates and see that the amount of fast food eaten has risen in recent years. So this lifestyle factor is going to contribute to an increase in certain non-communicable diseases. Similarly, smoking in a certain town may have a higher incidence than in a neighbouring town. And on a national level, this translates to various regions having higher rates of smoking. So for example, the north of England smoke a lot. And globally, the access to cigarettes has increased on the whole. So all of this is going to contribute to an increase in non-communicable disease on these various levels. But now let's take a look at an example of how changes at local, national and global levels can decrease incidence of coronary heart disease. So for example, certain areas on a local level are reducing alcohol intake. On a national level, the government are implementing various policies, so for example they may limit alcohol purchase from supermarkets after 11 p.m. This is going to lead to a decrease in alcohol consumption on the whole. And on a global level, there's increased education and awareness of alcohol. Therefore, people realise that they need to drink alcohol in moderation. If not, it can prove a threat to their health. So this is a really good example of how changes at these various levels can decrease the incidence of a non-communicable disease. So it works both ways. So lifestyle factors increase your risk of non-communicable diseases on a local level. So, as I said, an impoverished area may have increased alcohol intake and smoking, leading to greater incidence of these diseases on a national level. And if a country is less economically developed, it may have a worse lifestyle, leading to a higher rate of these diseases on a global level. So now we've looked at lifestyle factors, so let's go on to look at some environmental factors. So asbestos, for example, may be present in certain buildings. But on a national level, there could be a high air pollution in general. And at a global level, there could be a high carbon emissions at a global level. And these are all going to contribute to an increased risk of non-communicable disease. So can you see how various factors are differently affecting populations at different levels? So we have the local, national and global levels. So something that I want to draw upon here is that correlation does not always mean causation. Now I'm sure you've heard this phrase a lot, so we're just going to break this down and make sure that you really understand it. So a causal mechanism means that there is a link between two factors. So I can confidently say that X causes Y. But a correlation does not always prove causation. So take this example. So we may see a 10% rise in smoking in the UK population. And at the same time, we see an 8% rise in coronary heart disease. So this is a correlation, okay? We're seeing an increase in the percentage of both of these factors happening. But we can't say this is a causation because we don't know. Here, now let's look at the 6% rise in Weetabix sales and also the 8% rise in coronary heart disease. So we see another correlation. But this does not mean causation because I can tell you now that a rise in Weetabix sales is not going to increase your coronary heart disease levels. So can you see here how correlation does not always prove causation? And in fact, most diseases are caused by a combination of factors. So coronary heart disease, for example, is linked to multiple factors. So this may be poor exercise, drinking, smoking, poor diet. So often X does not cause Y, but actually multiple factors cause Y. So now let's have a look at the link between effects of diet, smoking and exercise on cardiovascular disease. So poor diet increases the risk of obesity because it may lead to a higher cholesterol level in the person. And this can increase the chance of atherosclerosis developing, so the chance of fatty deposits building up in the lining of arteries and therefore blocking the arteries. And we saw this in our tutorial on coronary heart disease, that was tutorial number 2.4. And in that we saw that fatty plaques building up on the arterial wall of coronary arteries, so the arteries supplying the heart, causes a lack of blood supply to certain areas of the heart and therefore means that the heart muscle starts to fail. So that was diet. So now let's have a look at smoking. So artery walls can be damaged by smoke tar chemicals. So nicotine in particular can lead to an increase in heart rate, and nicotine also makes platelets sticky, and remember platelets are those fragments in your blood plasma that cause clotting, and so nicotine can actually increase the rate of clotting in your arteries and therefore also lead to an increased incidence of cardiovascular disease. So you see here in smoking it's multiple factors that contribute to the increased risk in cardiovascular disease. Exercise increases blood supply to the heart and it can also reduce cholesterol level. And this reduces the cardiovascular disease risk. So exercise is protective against cardiovascular disease. So we've had a look at 3 factors that contribute to cardiovascular disease: smoking, diet and exercise. So now let's come on to look at obesity and its associated risk factors. So obesity and type 2 diabetes. So obesity makes the body less sensitive to insulin. And insulin is a hormone that's responsible for allowing our cells to uptake glucose from the blood and therefore use it in respiration to produce energy in the form of ATP. So if we don't have enough insulin, or if our body cells are less sensitive to insulin, then we're going to have higher blood glucose because our cells are not efficiently removing the glucose from our blood. So this can lead to an increased incidence of type 2 diabetes. And a way of reducing the incidence of type 2 diabetes is, for example, to reduce the incidence of obesity, and we can do that by changing our diets, so limiting the number of high sugar foods that we eat, for example. So now let's have a look at alcohol and the liver function and also the brain function. So long-term drinking of large volumes of alcohol can damage the liver because it can cause basically scarring of the liver, so we call this liver cirrhosis, and it can also increase the incidence of liver cancer. In addition, alcohol damages the nervous system, so therefore it can affect brain function. So let's move on to have a look at smoking and how this may increase the risk of lung disease and lung cancer. So previously we looked at how smoking can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, but here we see it acting in a different way. So tobacco contains many chemicals that can affect the body, which can increase the risk of lung disease. So tar damages the alveoli, and remember the alveoli are the basic structural unit of the lung and they're responsible for gas exchange. So if we have damage to the alveoli, we're going to have less efficient gas exchange, we're not going to have very good oxygen loading into our hemoglobin of our red blood cells. So we're going to be getting less oxygen to various parts of the body. But in addition, if it's damaging the alveoli, we're actually damaging the basic structural unit of the lung. So this can lead to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, and it can also cause lung cancer. And other chemicals in smoke can also affect the lung in various other ways. So it may flatten the cilia and the trachea, so they can no longer move the mucus. Because remember, cilia are these processes that waft away any bacteria that's basically or dust particles that get stuck in the mucus of the trachea. So now let's move on to have a look at smoking, alcohol and babies. So if a pregnant lady smokes, she's going to starve the baby of oxygen, because remember we said that tar causes damage to the alveoli, and so we're going to have less oxygen being transmitted across the alveoli into the blood, into the haemoglobin of the red blood cells, and therefore less oxygen is going to be delivered to the rest of the body. So in terms of a pregnant woman, the woman needs to get oxygen to her baby. But if the alveoli are being damaged by smoke particles, then she's going to deprive the baby of oxygen. And this can actually lead to stillbirths, premature birth, or reduced birth weight. And alcohol can cross the placenta and lead to deformities and heart problems. So it can cross the placenta, enter the baby's own little cushioned zone, and affect the baby, which can lead to developmental problems, or I should really say the fetus here, not the baby. And now let's have a look at carcinogens. So carcinogens are factors that predispose cancer. So this can include ionising radiation, smoking and viruses. And lab workers who work around carcinogens may wear radiation detectors to reduce exposure, because it's really, really important that we reduce our exposure to carcinogens. So make sure you learn each of these risk factors and how they may contribute to a particular non-communicable disease, because this will come up in exams very commonly, and it's really important that you're able to commit this to memory. So let's do a little test of how well you know these risk factors. So remind me what alcohol increases the risk of you developing. Well, it's going to be liver and heart disease, but also brain function. Now, how about smoking? Can you remember what that increases the risk of? Well, it's going to be cancer, lung disease, and heart disease. And now let's take a look at what diet increases the risk of. Well, previously in this session, we said that it increased the risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes. So if you got any of those wrong, just rewind the video at this point and go back and listen to how these particular risk factors contribute to an increased risk of non-communicable disease. And finally, we're going to move on to sampling. So in our last tutorial, we had a look at the importance of sampling in the sense that it's inefficient to ask every individual in a population about a particular aspect of their life. So in order to make it a bit more efficient, we take a random, large, unbiased sample from the population. And samples can be used to look for people with risk factors. And risk factors can be plotted on graphs and tables in order to show correlations. So a correlation is basically a trend in a set of data. So for example, we can say that as X increases, Y increases. So for example, as smoking increases, the rate of cardiovascular disease increases. But we can't say that smoking causes this increase because we don't have any proof. So that's the difference here. We can say there's a correlation. We can say that as smoking increases, the rate of cardiovascular disease increases. But we can't say that one causes the other. So that's really, really important. This is where correlation does not mean causation comes in. So for example, take a look at this graph. Can you see the correlation here? Why don't you just trace with your hand on the screen where you think the correlation is? Well, I'll show you now. This is your correlation. If I were to draw a rough line, think of it almost as a line of best fit. And this is showing your trend in your data. So we're saying that as you go along the x-axis, we're getting a decrease in the unit on the y-axis. So as we increase the input, we're getting a decrease in the quality characteristic. So this is your correlation. So risk factors can be plotted on graphs and in tables, as I showed on the previous slide. And on a graph, if there is a link, there is a correlation. So this will be clear when you can draw a straight line through the data, as we did on the previous slide. So well done for today. We covered a lot of little details, so do go back and watch the slides, especially on the risk factors and their respective non-communicable diseases, because that's really, really important for you to commit to memory. And well done for today, and I'll see you for the next session.
Thanks for watching this free video from StudyMind. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe to catch our newest videos by clicking below, and leave a comment on a topic you'd like a video on. Click here to watch more videos in our series for GCSE Biology, or visit our website studymind.co.uk for free past paper compilations by topic and specification.